Okay, welcome to another episode of the Ed Lowe podcast. Subscribe. That's what I say every time. That's what a famous YouTuber once told me that I needed to tell everybody at the beginning and end of every one of my episodes. But today, I'm very excited. We have a sports historian, a sports writer, Bob Ryan. Bob, thanks for coming on the Ed Lowe podcast.
Oh, you're welcome. Nice to be with you.
Yeah. So, Bob, you have a long career of writing, particularly for the Boston Globe. And I wanted to ask you just right out the gate, what got you into sports writing?
If ever anybody that you will encounter was set in motion at an early age to follow a certain career path, it was me. I can truthfully say that from the time I was 2 years old, I was immersed in sports due to my father's background and my father's job, and it never stopped. He was and I'm from Trenton, New Jersey, and he was a local, very well known locally for being involved in sports in various capacities of promotion and marketing and public relations and such. And at that time, he was doing stuff for the Trenton Giants of the Class B, that's in Bob, Interstate League, and in minor league baseball, and where, in fact, in 1950, Willie Mays made his organized baseball debut. And according to all the family folklore, I was at the ballpark that night, as I was every night, because he was working with the team, and my mother and we went to the game every night. And so I was 4 years old, and I can say I was there when Willie Mays broke into organized baseball in Trenton in 1950. All right. He then went for 2 years to Villanova, where he was the assistant athletic director and was a promotions director. And though that got me exposed very deeply into college sports, Villanova football and basketball. I started going to the Palestra and Penn Palestra when I was 6 years old, and 1952. And so for those 2 years, 52 to 54, I got my taste of college basketball, which I still have. And so I always say my foundation sports are baseball and college basketball. Those are the two building blocks sports for me, all due to my father's position. And concurrent with that, however, is that I was a pretty smart little boy, and I was a reader. I loved reading. And so it was logical for me to be reading about sports, as well as to living a totally normal childhood in a neighborhood, a classic old 50s, 40s, 50s, 60s kind of neighborhood, with kids all over the place, all around. And just go out in the house in the morning and spend all day playing with your friends. And, you get literally called in for dinner. Bobby, time to eat. That's the life I lived. But I was the only kid in the block, I'm sure that knew the infield fly rule. And for example, and I read all kinds of biographies of teams and individuals, many of which are still in this bookcase behind me. Believe me, a book that I devoured called Baseball's Greatest Players was written in 1955, and it included everybody from Ed Delahanty of the 1890s to Roy Campanella. And I read that backwards and forwards, and I read biographies of Bob Feller's strikeout story and Joe DiMaggio's Lucky to Be a Yankee, and the Babe Ruth story by Tom Meany, which was written in 1947, and they're all up on the bookshelf right here. And in 1955, when I was 9, I was given a subscription to Sporting News by my parents, and I also was given a book for Christmas called Modern Baseball Strategy, written by Paul Richards, who was then the manager of the Orioles. He managed both the Orioles and the White Sox over the years, and was very well known in baseball. And I devoured that book and learned about such things as how you construct a batting order, and what the thought process was, and so forth, and value of the cutoff man and all that stuff. So played Little League baseball,
Nice.
Played basketball, lived a totally normal childhood in that regard. But unlike most kids who don't wake up and say when they're 7 or 8 years old on a Sunday and are said, well, we're going to the Polo Grounds today, or well, we're going to Connie Mack Stadium today, or even Shibe Park before it was Connie Mack Stadium. That's the life I led. And so I love it when people rhapsodize about, I remember my first game. My father took me, my uncle Sid and my grandfather, and I remember the green grass and blah, 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 blah. Most people have that story. They remember I
Right.
have no idea what my first game was. That's all I ever did. I mean, seriously, there's not even remotely possible to tell you what my first game was. No idea.
Yeah.
But there were plenty of them. And I always say that I do not remember a time in those years, those formative years, when we weren't at a game, going to a game, or getting ready to go to a game. That is how
Mm.
we lived. And so if ever anybody was programmed or DNA'd or whatever, how you want to phrase it, to be oriented into a certain career path, it was yours truly.
Wow, that's awesome. I mean, do you ever? I'm assuming you obviously have a passion for sports. I assume that you're grateful for that childhood and being able to have that
Oh, of course. It's funny, you don't know things until later. It was a great place to grow up too. It's no longer necessarily so, but it was a great place
life.
because two things I cared about the most: sports and music. And sports were, it was a big sports town, very big high school basketball town, not so much football. Actually, way ahead of its time as a soccer town, although I didn't participate, but I can tell you it was one of the 3 or 4 soccer hotbeds in America in the 50s. There weren't many. St. Louis, Bridgeport, and Trenton were 3 of them. Anyway, and we were, plus we were only an hour and a half from the Jersey Shore. So that was part of our life in the summer. And then when rock and roll hit, well, circa 54, 55, we had all the stations in New York and Philly, and with television, unlike most markets, so people grew up in the 50s, they'd had the 3 network affiliates. That was the sum total of their television opportunity, the 3 network affiliates in whatever market that you lived in. Well, not so in Trenton, New Jersey. You got every channel on the dial except one, because we had all the Philadelphia stations and all the New York stations. And with the New York stations, in addition to the network affiliates, you had Channel 5, Channel 11, Channel as well, which by the way, and Channel 9, they did the Dodger games. Channel 11 did the Yankees and the Giants games. So, and
wow.
Channel 6 did the Phillies games. So we had this opportunity to see Major League Baseball, whereas most people in America and the great beyond, they got the game of the week with Dizzy
Right.
D. Blattner. That's what they got,
Yeah.
period. We got baseball 7 days a week and way ahead of its time. And so that I had that immersion as well. And sports was an opportunity. And Trenton was really a great place to grow up. It couldn't have been better for somebody like me with those 2 dual passions.
Sure. Wow. So your music passion, was it rock and roll that got you into that?
It was no, it predated. I mean, I grew up. We always had a TV. We always watched the variety shows. We were an Ed Sullivan family, and on Sunday nights at 8 o'clock, and other variety. But that was the predominant variety show of the time. Ed Sullivan reigned from 48 to 71, and it was a ritual. You watch Ed Sullivan. Well, you would see all these variety of performers. People singing Broadway shows, standards, opera, even. So we had records in the house. All kinds of records, and then when rock and we listened to radio all the time. Radio was always on, and so it naturally fell into music. And then when rock and roll hit, I immersed it. I was a big Elvis fan, and then I got hooked on WABC in New York and WIBG in Philadelphia and so my feet are in both worlds. I like Broadway. I like standards. I've read books on all the famous composers. I mean, Berlin, Kern, Porter, Rogers and Hammerstein, Johnny Mercer. I've got the biographies of all those people, and I love that music. I'm a Sirius XM addict. I listen to Sirius XM. That's what I like. And of course, anything that you want is available on Sirius XM. So I listened to the 50s, the 60s, the 40s, the Broadway, and the Beatles channel, and that's what I do.
So that being in that time frame, I mean, the landscape, I mean, in that time frame in the 50s and 60s, I think the landscape of, well, maybe sports a little bit later, but the landscape of music and sports really just started, changing dramatically. I mean, with the advent of rock and roll and as TV got bigger, sports just and music just kind of it was a revolution with the advent of TV. I mean, do you look back and go, man, like that's just an amazing time to be alive?
Yeah, well, of course. Let's just talk about Bandstand, okay? And now I started watching a show called Bandstand, not American Bandstand, Bandstand, which was a Philadelphia program, which on Channel 6. It was at 2:30 in the afternoon till 5. And I could never understand. I would get home from school at about 10 of 3 from grade school. 10 of 3, I took and turn on the TV, and there were these kids on bandstand, and I couldn't understand how they got out of school so early. I still don't know how that happened. And that show later became, this is before Dick Clark. The original host guy name was Bob Horn, and he had some kind of scandal. I don't know what it was, but he had,
Right.
anyway. And then Dick Clark took over, and then eventually the show became national as American Bandstand, was on from 4 to 5:30 Eastern. And after the original show was 2:30 to 5, and I watched that show a lot. And I watched Art Linkletter's House Party, which was on at 2:30 as well. And I watched variety shows. And when I wasn't going out to play, now mostly this would be in the fall and the winter, when you went out, when the weather wasn't as good in Trenton, New Jersey, as it is in the spring and the summer. In the summer, of course, you're out playing all day long. So I watched a lot of those shows. So, but oh yeah, Bandstand was formed. That was a must. You had to watch Bandstand. And all the rock and roll performers of the time, lusted to be on Bandstand to get that opportunity, that exposure with Dick Clark. So I still have a Bandstand yearbook from 1957. They call it, I got it. So yeah, no, yeah, we have music, very much so. TV helped, and yeah, no question.
Yeah, it's funny. Being of my ilk, I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and seeing the advent of streaming. I mean, there really is no more, other than sports. There's really no must-see TV. You can watch anything anytime you want. I remember in the 80s and 90s having certain shows that you were sitting down as a family, at a certain time on a certain day to watch whatever show, whether it was, I know that The Simpsons were big for a while, Roseanne, Married with Children, all these different TV shows. And now it's just sports. I mean, you want to sit down and watch it live. And so tell me, as far as it sounds like baseball, basketball are your passions. Do you have a favorite team?
Well, I grew up, yes. My favorite team growing up was the New York Giants. And that started, actually, I had a little bit of an affinity. Never liked the Yankees. That was always a given that you didn't like the Yankees. Now, I did like the Dodgers a little bit. But then in 1954, when Willie Mays came back to the Giants after being in the Army, I got hooked on that team. And I became a Giant fan, and I was a passionate Giant fan right up to some guy came along to hit a lot of home runs, but his head was very big. Remember him? And
I do remember him. Yeah, you're talking to a San Francisco Giant fan, so I know. I remember all.
And I was repulsed by him, and especially after having seen the scene in their locker room, and when he was like an emperor and all everybody else was like the subjects to the emperor. So I had no toleration for him, and I stopped rooting for the Giants. And I said, I had a Giants hat that I had purchased at Candlestick Park, and I said, I will not put this hat on my head until he's gone. And it kind of diminished my appetite for the Giants. But I was a Giants fan all throughout the 50s and 60s. And of course, 62, Willie, Game 7, Willie McCovey, line drive to Richardson, the whole thing. Later on, anyway, I was a Giants fan. And when they went to San Francisco, I remained steadfast a Giants fan. And then football, I did root for the New York, as we called them those days, the New York Football Giants. That's what you called them. Yeah. I rooted for them, and as much as, but I wasn't as passionate about football at all, and I still aren't. Football's business. And I appreciate it. I've lived with it my whole life. But I've written this, Josh, that if they stop playing football in the next 5 minutes, it wouldn't bother me. I can live without football. I don't need any more football. XFL, are you kidding me? I don't need anything. It's just enough football. Football is if you put the rules down of football to an alien invader and say, this is a national game, most famous game, most popular game in this country, and you give them the rules, and these gigantic people smashing into each other with bodily harm is very, very possible for territorial gain to get under that turf or the little dirt area, grass area at the end of the field, and they say, that's legal? I mean, football's a barbaric enterprise that we've codified, okay, fine. I don't want to go, I'll get off the soapbox right now, but I can appreciate it. I've lived it my whole life, and then you got to cover it, and I've covered it, and I enjoy venues and all that, but, and we were very blessed, we've been blessed with the Patriots and all that stuff, but I can live without football, but I could not live without baseball and basketball. I would like 6 months each of those would be fine with me. Now I like other.
What about, who's your basketball fan team?
Well, obviously, I covered growing up. territorially, I would follow the 76ers or the
Mm.
Warriors. Then of course they moved to San Francisco, and the 76ers after people don't realize Philadelphia was out of the league for a whole year. They are not a consecutive member of the National Basketball Association because for 62, 63, in between the year after the Warriors moved to San Francisco and the Nats relocated to Philadelphia to become the 76ers, there was no team in Philadelphia. And people don't realize that. Anyway, then Syracuse Nats became what we know now as the 76ers. And when I was in college at Boston College, I definitely did not root for the Celtics. I definitely rooted for the 76ers. And I never rooted for the Celtics until the 69 playoffs. That's the first time I ever found myself actually actively rooting. But at that point, I had already joined the Boston Globe as a summer intern in '68. And, it naturally had affiliations, and it was easy, never dreaming that I was going to wind up covering them 3 different times for 13 and a half years and, and being closely affiliated with them. And I'm proud of it, but I didn't see that. And when I was in college, trust me, that wasn't a goal. That wasn't a goal. Like I had one goal in college. And if you asked me at age 20, what do you want to do? I said, well, I want to write for Sports Illustrated. That was the holy grail for me at the time, and many others.
Wow. So tell me, I mean, I've never, for whatever reason, I'm an attorney by trade. I've never wanted to be a writer or a journalist per se. What is it? Was it just because Sports Illustrated was so big, or was there something else about specifically Sports Illustrated?
Sports Illustrated was enormously important in those days. I know people find it hard to believe now that you waited, a game would be played on Saturday or Sunday in football, and then you waited, and then Thursday the magazine came and you read what the writers had to say about that game from Saturday or Sunday and fleshed it out and all the stuff. Today with today's instantaneous ability to know everything, and it's a totally different world. And Sports Illustrated is dying. It's dying. It's not going to last much longer, I don't think. And it's now down to it's not every week. And but it was the currency. It was what you wanted to do. It's whether, and the writers were gods to us. Frank DeFord particularly was my idol, and but all this Dan Jenkins and all those guys, they were huge. They were important. That was, and to be on the cover of Sports Illustrated was the dream of every athlete in America. At that time, growing up in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And Sports Illustrated, and So that's what I would have wanted to have done. Now, in retrospect, I'm glad it didn't happen. I've learned from knowing many people who worked there over the years that many of them left unhappily. And the thing about Sports Illustrated, one thing about it is that it's not a writer's magazine. It's an editor's magazine. At least it always has been.
Sure.
The difference is that the editors have the final say, manually messing around with your copy, changing things, rearranging things. I never had to worry about that at the Boston Globe. They never did that to me once. Now it's 55 years and 44 since I officially retired, and 11 years now I'm into retirement. But I never had to worry about that. So I'm glad I did interview with them briefly twice, and I'm glad it didn't materialize. So my life turned out just fine. But that's what I would have wanted to have done when I was 20.
Wow. So right now, I mean, this seems to happen quite a bit. The Sixers are playing the Celtics. So who do you vote for? Who do you root for?
Oh, well, no, obviously my affinity's been with Boston for, ever since I started covering the team at 69. And unlike a lot of people, there's different kind of temperaments that people bring to the job. And my foundation as a sports writer is that I'm a fan first, last, and always. I'm a fan of the sport. I'm a fan of sport, and I see no problem in wanting to pull for a team that you cover, as long as you understand it. Once you sit down to write, you put on your journalist hat and you write from I hate the concept of objectivity. Everything is subjective. Every word you pick is subjective. No, it's about fairness. Are you treating this circumstance here fairly? Are you trying to be are you doing fair? I have no problem. Now, a lot of people like to brag about the fact that I don't care who wins and loses ever. I just want the story. I just want the story, and I like to write about people. Well, let me tell you something. Writing about people is the layup drill of writing. If you can't write about people, if you don't have the sufficient compassion and empathy and sensitivity and intelligence and background and experience and command of the language and human feeling you don't belong in writing to start with, and if you can't write about people, that's the easy part. The hard part is, making something journalistically sound out of a game 55 in February, and when and it's a mundane game. What do you do with that game? And whatever sport we're talking about, that's the talent, that's the skill. Writing about people. And here's the other thing that I always laugh about when I think about they talk about the people. The game comes first. Why? Because if it weren't for the game, who would care about these people? That's the context. We don't care about, so you have to love the game first. And I do. I'm proud of a lot of writing profiles. I've written a lot of good profiles, I think, and I think I can do that. But that's not the hard part. That's the easy part.
Sure. So covering the Boston Celtics, I mean, you've done it for a long time, and there's a long history of really great players. I mean, who was your favorite to watch and cover?
Well, that's a good question, and then there's two different distinct answers. Clearly, the best player was Larry Bird. Period. The best player that I covered was Larry Bird. John Havlicek being 1A. I really, the lessons you learn it, and we never do learn this lesson. Nobody, ever. Which is, you always assume that at the moment that you're not going to see anything as good as what you just saw, and somebody always comes along, that changes your outlook. When Havlicek retired in 1978, and I was part of the coverage and John Powers, who was covering the team at that time, and I did a joint farewell package pull-out session for the Globe, on the farewell to John Havlicek. I was pretty firm in the belief I'd never see anything this good again, for me. 2 years later, who walks in? Okay.
Right.
Oh, okay. Now, but my favorite personality package of player combination and fascinating subject is Dave Cowens. Dave Cowens is the greatest package for me. The greatest combination of Hall of Fame. He's a Hall of Famer, Hall of Fame skill, an electrifying style that was all his own, and the most intellectually curious and fascinating person that I ever covered. Interesting, quirky, incisive, curious, just fun to be around. Dave Cowens, and I'm still in touch with Dave Cowens, and I'm happy to say that. There's so many interesting Dave Cowens stories, that.
Sure.
I'll just give you an example of the way his mind works, and that. In 1970, and this is also a story about how the world has changed, and you'll love this one. In 1974, Game 7 between the Celtics and the Bucks for the National Basketball Association Championship was on a Sunday afternoon at the Milwaukee Arena. Sunday afternoon in Milwaukee. Celtics play, they win the game. So after the game, we fly back home via Chicago, changing planes in Chicago, after Milwaukee to Chicago. No direct flight available for us. We're flying commercial, of course. Nobody flew charter in those days. The Knicks once in a while, but nobody else did. Okay. So I had not, in the course of all my post-game interviewing that day, I was the beat guy. I for some reason I didn't talk to Cowens, who was very instrumental, but I didn't get much out of him, whatever it was. So I catch up to him at the airport as we're changing planes, and I said, Dave, well, you did it. This is 5 years in for him now. You did it, and 4 years. Yeah. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, 4 years in, you did it. You won a championship. How's it feel? He says, and I quote, "The fun for me is in the doing. This is just something for my portfolio of basketball experiences." Now, 49 years later, I have not had a better line delivered to me by an athlete or interview subject. You can't top that one. And the thing is, and I keep saying to myself, and this is yet another reason because since I am in contact with him, I've never followed up. Okay, Dave, what other things are in your portfolio now, 49 years later, in your portfolio of basketball experiences? And is that number one? But that's typical of Dave Cowens and the other aspects that made him special.
Yeah. So give me a good Larry Bird story. What's your favorite Larry Bird story covering him?
There's a few. One of them is I love this one. We were in Chicago, and it was before the game, really early, and he was shooting around. And I said to him, "I'll bet you $5 you can't make a left-hand three-pointer." So he walks immediately to the corner, naturally, right? second one, swish. So I hand him the $5 bill, which he takes and he puts it in his sock. And I want to believe to this day he played that entire game with that $5 bill in his sock, because that's the way Larry Bird was. He was very careful with his money. And anyway, that's one. I don't really have. People think you may have a whole lot of. That's one of my favorites. But another one. I don't want to denigrate the gentleman involved, but the fact is that one night we were in Hartford, where they played 3 or 4 times a year in those days, and for the game, and they're playing Cleveland, and they weren't very good at the time. And he said, "Who's going to guard me, do you think?" I said, "I think Ben McDonald." He went, and when I got 29 in the first half.
I love, those guys, Larry Bird, Michael Jordan, those guys. I've heard a story often where I can't remember the name of the guy. Michael Jordan was talking to Byron Scott. Byron Scott was injured, and he walks up, they're playing the Lakers, and he goes, "Hey, who you're injured, who's guarding me?" And he names some guy, and he just goes, 50. And he went out and got 50 that night. It's just those, and I've heard all sorts of stories about Larry Bird and the trash talk.
I think the trash talk was somewhat overrated, but he did do some stuff. It's true that he was torching the Jazz, and who had a long run, they were terrible. And he torched the Jazz, and he runs by Frank Layden and said, "Don't you have anybody who can guard me?"
Yeah.
He would do stuff like that. But of course he and Magic, they had this tremendous competition, and he used to, if Magic would be, it'd be and getting him, because he wouldn't guard Larry in general, because he was a guard guarding a guard, but there'd be switches. Sure. And if Larry if he find himself guarded by Magic, he'd yell, "Hey, I got a little one."
Yeah. Oh man, that had to have been a really cool time. It sounds like you've followed them throughout that Celtics Lakers rivalry.
Oh boy, the 80s, it was great. It was great. Of course, the fact that those two came along concurrently, it was so great for the league. Obviously, everybody understands that, and absolutely, it was great. And their bond as time went on, it was and is very real. They're very friendly. But the one-upsmanship, and the whole package. The Pat Riley as a coach, and the stuff that he did. He won in 1982 after when they beat the Lakers. They beat the 76ers. Riley sent thank you notes to many members of the press for the coverage for the relationships during that. Can you imagine that? It was it's just, the league in those days, Josh, going back to the 70s when I started, was a giant fraternity. It's a giant fraternity, and we were all part of it. And you were acknowledged that you were part of it. I'll give you a story. One night in the 70s, I don't know what year it was. We were flying, the whole package, the whole entourage, east to west to go to LA, start a road trip, and once again changing planes in Chicago and O'Hare, and we're walking down the corridor, and here come these very large people coming the other way. And these very large people were the Phoenix Suns, who were going from west to east to start a trip. And we were both changing planes, killing time. And all of a sudden, everybody's at the bar, the whole teams, and the coaches and the trainers and the broadcasters. And it was like a giant fraternity meeting. And then we all went our separate ways. But I'll never forget that night. And that was the NBA at the time.
Wow, that's really awesome. It had to have been cool to just be a part of that.
Oh, it was. If you, and I say this, you ask anybody who was privileged enough to have been through it and have a career in covering the NBA, what was the best time? I'll tell you this. I'll tell you the 80s. The 80s were when it all came together, because the basketball, first of all, for those of us in non-Sun Belt locales, the Lakers were in the finals 8 times. So that meant 8 times we're going to get the free trips to California in the spring. That was, I'm serious. Don't think I wasn't an inducement. And they were there. There was always the Lakers. You always count on the Lakers being there. So that's number one. But the relationships, the camaraderie that was there, the respect that they had still for the media, it was great. But on the games, now there were just think about what we're talking about, the Birds and the Magics, and then of course the tail end of the decade, the Bad Boys, and
Yeah.
they asserted themselves circa '87 when Larry made the steal on Isaiah. They very easily could have won that series, but they didn't. And then of course '88 they go to the finals, '89 they win, '90 they win. That was their era. And the '76ers, Dr. J, Darryl Dawkins, Bobby Jones, Andrew Toney, Maurice Cheeks, and Billy Cunningham, who was one of my all-time favorite people ever in the league, is just a wonderful man. Billy Cunningham was fun. There was just so many aspects to it that were fun. Even the referees were fun. Earl Strom,
Yeah.
was a character, and we were all part of something, And then the media, we routinely played. Everywhere we went, we played. We'd get a gym and we played, and we had all this stuff going on. So the media was a big, one for all thing. The whole thing. I always say this, John, if I could turn the clock back to January 1st, 1980 until January 31st, 1989, and we lived the entire thing professionally, the entire thing, I'd do it good, bad, and I'd do it in a second. It was
Wow.
exactly.
It was cool being, I mean, I was a kid at the time, and I think I told you off air, my dad was a hardcore Boston Celtics fan, still is. So, and I'm a King season ticket holder. I've born and raised in Sacramento, so I'm traumatized by Kings fandom. But every time I was blessed to be able to say that I saw Larry Bird, Magic Johnson, Michael Jordan come through Arco Arena and play. I saw Larry Bird's last game in Arco Arena, and it's very rare. I was telling my son this when we were actually watching Tom Brady play, and of course everybody for some reason hates Tom Brady, which doesn't make any sense. And when you see somebody like that, does that make sense?
I can understand, and he's getting crazy as time's going on too.
Sure, but what I told him is I remember telling him, it's very rare when you're watching the greatest to ever do it and and like that's how I felt in those years when you're watching Larry Bird and Magic Johnson go at it, and then watching Michael Jordan. It's very rare, especially in basketball. It's very rare, and I think you kind of get that with Steph Curry and LeBron James now. But it's like, I mean, I just got through the traumatizing experience of a Game 7 50-pointer by Steph Curry. I was in the crowd watching it, and it's very rare when someone gets the ball and you're so excited that they missed, because they just don't when it comes to big shots. And that's the way Michael Jordan was. You were just surprised that he didn't hit the game winner. Or same with Larry Bird on that one. I can't remember what year it was, when I think it was Game 5 or maybe Game 6, where they had the opportunity to win and he misses the 3-pointer at the end, and you're shocked because it looked like it was going in and you missed it.
Well, that was that was in '87. Were you there at Arco Arena tonight? He missed the 2 free throws though that didn't win, that cost him the game. The first game after the All-Star break.
No, I didn't catch that one.
Yeah, Larry astonishingly missed 2 free throws in Arco one night, and but it was the first game after an All-Star break. I know that, and I wasn't there, but I wasn't off the beat that year. But I know he did that. I know exactly what you mean, and we're looking at more greatness right now that is historic. I'm telling you, with guys like Giannis and Jokic and Embiid. I mean, what Embiid is doing to the Celtics he is historically unique at 7 feet.
Yeah,
really is. And again, and his own way, they're all specifically unique in their own 7-foot way. Giannis, we've never seen anything like Giannis. We've never seen anything like Jokic. We've never seen anything like Embiid. They're all 7 feet. They all play a game that would have been unrecognizable to all of us 30 years ago. And but they're all distinct. They're not the same.
Yeah.
They're all,
speaking of Jokic, and this is something I don't understand, and I'm wondering what you think. So he was on pace. There was talk that he was going to win his 3rd MVP in a row.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember hearing there was a podcast, I think it was DeMarcus Cousins and Kevin Garnett talking about him winning. And Cousins was like, if he does that, he's one of the greatest centers of all time. Are we ready to say that? Blah, 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 blah. And I was just thinking to myself, I go, well, wait a minute. Why would we not be willing to say that if he's averaging a triple-double which nobody's done other than I think Oscar Robinson and maybe Russell Westbrook.
Right. That's all.
Yeah, and he's averaging a triple double as a center. I mean, what is it? What is it exactly that you're not ready to say he's one of the greatest to ever do it? Is it because he just doesn't look like a basketball player? Because that's the thing. You look at him, right, and he's kind of heavier. He's kind of slow. He looks a little oafy, but he kills you.
No, you're so right. And of course, the idea that you can't rank him like up there is wrong. But I don't know. I certainly disagree with that. And of course, he belongs. These guys. It's interesting because I just got through writing a column and I was talking about my last thought based on Curry and and right after the 50-point game. And people were then a lot of tweeting. The Twitter world was going off. Where's he ranking the all-time? Top 10 and all that. And it's a good question because he's there. And I expanded it to 15. It's so hard, it's ridiculous. And without mentioning, including the guys whose careers are not yet done. Now he's 14 years in the league, but obviously Giannis has got a long way to go. Jokic has a long way to go, and Embiid has a long way to go. So now in the end they're going to be involved in these discussions. Right now I'm leaving them out of it just for the sake of. In the list that I had, I think that the briefest career was 13 years. So sure. I mean, these are that's understood. That we're going to have to revamp this discussion. You always are going to have to revamp these discussions in all sports, right? There's no question. Of course, that's the idea. Fine, but of course they're going to be. He belongs in that discussion, and we haven't seen anything like this. A center who is routinely now. We have, in a sense. I shouldn't say that. Very different body. We did. Wilt Chamberlain for 2 years in 1960, 67 and 67, 68, averaged 24, 24, 8. Okay, people don't remember that. That he did. It's Allison, what I call his middle phase, his all-around phase, and he led the league in assists, which was a goal, and maybe overdid it. People talk about it. He had selfish assists. He should have shot the ball, but he wanted to pass it back out. Anyway, we did have this, so let's not forget that when we're having this discussion. And we have seen something like this before, but not with the artistry that Jokic has as a passer. I have to tell you something about I guess after his rookie year, I was contacted by a Denver writer and about how Jokic is passing, and in context of Bill Walton, who, I still think is the greatest passing center of all time. And I had not seen Jokic. I don't think I ever saw him play that year. And so I wasn't aware of what we were talking about here. And of course, I summarily dismissed the idea that that somebody could be compared remotely to Bill Walton as a passer. Well, now that I've had sufficient exposure to Jokic, I have to say, if he ain't one, he's 1A. If he ain't two, he is the answer. That he is the closest thing that give Bill Walton the challenge as the best passing center of all time. I mean, his court vision is just phenomenal. And you're right; it's just so much fun to watch him. He goes wherever he wants to go in his plodding way, and they can't stop him.
Right. And when he's running up and down the court, he's open mouth breathing like he's so tired, but he just never stops. Like that's the thing that's so crazy.
I know he's not. He doesn't appear to be a supremely conditioned athlete. That's for sure.
Him and Luka Doncic both. Like I don't think other than Larry Bird I've ever seen a slower player in my life. But he can blow by anybody.
Doncic goes wherever he wants to go. He goes where he gets where he's going. Right, in his own plodding way. Yeah. Yeah, and Larry figured out how to do it this way, right. But I haven't talked to Larry about it, but I know does he see? You'd like to think he sees some Doncic in him, I see some Doncic, and
I do too.
Yeah,
it's interesting when you compare players. So obviously I'm a Kings fan, so I want to talk about them a little bit. But De'Aaron Fox this last year, do you think he compares a little bit to an Isaiah Thomas?
I think he's making his name. I'm sure. I have to say I need to see more of him to get a stylistic view. I know what he's accomplishing, and I know how important he was to that team this year. And I know he's getting this. He got some postseason recognition now, right?
Yeah, he did. And in fact, the thing that's funny, I've been watching him. I actually watched him in college. I was really excited when that year the two guards that were coming out were Lonzo Ball and De'Aaron Fox, and the Lakers took Lonzo second and we got Fox. And my opinion was at that time I said we got the better guard because they played each other in the tournament and he dropped 40 on Lonzo. I mean, and so I go, I go, I think we got the better guy. He's so fast. He's the fastest player I've ever seen.
No,
And
yeah, he's fast, and I'll tell you who's fast. Maxi's fast. I like to see that race.
yeah, yeah,
No, but
yeah.
yeah, no, he's absolutely. He's on. And I thought maybe you're going to mention. And interesting that he got a recognition, and John Morant was denied. He didn't make any of the three teams. And
Yeah, and that's surprising.
Well, we got a lot of competition, but still, people are now kicking around the idea that people not vote for him because of the off the court stuff. I don't.
Yeah.
I'm not a voter. I haven't been a voter for a few, several years now. I actually did vote for a few years after I retired. They gave me the privilege. I knew I was still following the league, but I no longer vote in the NBA. But anyway, that's another story for another day. No, Fox, you're right. He's on his way to. He's it's a Hall of Fame trajectory. I'll just put it that way. No question.
Yeah, and that's the thing that it's funny because we here in Sacramento, it's been such a wasteland for so long that nobody's really paying attention. And then boom, this year, I mean, I kind of saw, like I told you, I'm a season ticket holder. I went through 3-4 years of just unbearable basketball. And when Sabonis got here, it was clear that things had been changing,
Well,
and
my guy, I found first time I saw him at Gonzaga, I fell in love with him as a player. And because I was predisposed because I was a big fan of Daddy. And I will preach the gospel of Arvydas Sabonis to anybody at any time about what he was and what he could have been as on top of that. But but I love Sabonis. You're right, and and he made third team. I'm glad to see. Yeah.
Yeah, and that first game, it was actually you could feel a difference the game because it was controversial trade when they sent Tyrese Halliburton to Indiana.
Oh, yeah,
everybody loved him.
Sure.
Yeah, everybody loved him. There was a question. I legitimately thought we made the wrong trade. I said you should get Fox out there. Halliburton's a complete guy, and he is different player. But when Sabonis got here and you saw the way he played, I remember being excited, saying this seems like a legitimate change, right? Like for the better. And then the off season stuff they did last year. Getting Herter and Monk and doing those things to kind of get some 3-points out there, consistent 3-point shooters. Other than Buddy Hield was, God, he was good, but he was so streaky and he just made some of the dumbest decisions. So getting those guys in there, it's exciting. It's exciting to see that the Kings look like there is a possibility that they're going to get that magic that they had in 2002 to 2006.
I had adopted them. I have nothing against Golden State, but I was definitely actively rooting, for the Kings. As I said, I did write this column, and I was intrigued by. I've always been intrigued. I actually wrote this column a couple of years ago in Basketball Times. I recycled myself, frankly, but it is a unique history in the league and the franchise. That they came from Rochester and they won a championship. A very exciting 7th game, by the way, in 1971 and 51. And then they went to Cincinnati and on to Kansas City. And I lived through that with Kansas City, Omaha, and then Kansas City exclusively, and then finally Sacramento. It's a tortured history, and the Sacramento thing, having that door opened in the early 2000s. And we all know the infamous 7th game against the Lakers. And
gosh,
I know, I'm aware of it. And the drought since 2006, of the wasteland. And I think that didn't somebody do a story in one of the primary magazines, whether it was Esquire or Vanity Fair or something, somewhere along the way, there was even a story written about them in a non-sports magazine about them being the forgotten outpost of the NBA. I think
well, and I can tell you, just being here in Sacramento, I mean, first of all, you can't, I don't know. I mean, I've never lived anywhere else for any serious time. I spent 2 years in Indiana serving a mission for my church, and I know they're really hardcore about the Pacers. But there's never been a team, like, I don't know if there's been a losing team, like generally losing team that has a more passionate fan base than the Kings. I mean, people, they hate it, but they love it. They can't, it's the only thing we have. And so yeah, but there was years there. I mean, after the Maloofs, everybody loved them. I mean, like when they came in, everybody loved them until they started doing all that wonky stuff with the stadium or with the arena.
Yeah.
And then when Vivek came in, we kind of looked at him as a savior, but then he kind of, made some really dumb moves, firing Mike Malone when he was, he finally seemed like they turned it around, and then bringing in like coach after coach after coach. And they were big names, George Karl, Paul Westphal, like all these guys who you looked at and you said, well, yeah, they've been winners, but then giving them a year and then bailing and then bringing in Luke Walton, and you're like, maybe, So, and I played basketball, at a high level in high school. I didn't go farther than that, but you do know that there has to be some continuity to build something, and there just wasn't.
Yeah, no,
And so,
well, I'm glad finally that there's a good future that with the youth that the youth factor of this team, the age factor,
yeah,
is encouraging. So I hope it can be. I hope next year, things really.
Yeah. It's one of those things. It was funny. My son is 16 years old, so he's never seen the Kings in his lifetime make the playoffs. And it was so funny because we went to Game 7 together, and it was his first time experiencing every year of his existence. The last game of the regular season comes at the end of the season, so he's ready for it. But this is the first time where it's Game 7. You have hope. Yeah. Game over. That's it. Yeah. It's a different experience because he just was kind of like, well, now what do we do? I mean, he was really depressed, and I was like,
that's yeah, but I like it. It's good.
Yeah, but I told him, I said, hey, listen, if I had told you at the beginning of the season that they were going to make the playoffs, not the play-in, but the playoffs, and that they were going to take the defending champion Warriors to 7 games and lose, you would have thought that was a great year.
Sure.
Right. Sure. So it's all about perspective, but so you also followed baseball. Yes. Who was your favorite baseball player to cover?
Didn't really have one that emerged as a player to cover. Guys along the way, Kevin Millar was a fun character to be around in those Red Sox teams of 03, 04, etc. And he was the heartbeat, really of the team. Not the best player by far, but he drove the team in a sense. It was him. I would like Yastrzemski was reticent. I got to know him. He took a while to crack it. Mo Vaughn, there we go. Mo Vaughn was. I loved Mo Vaughn. He was good. He was incisive, and he was just everything. So I would have to say John Valentin was a guy I liked a lot in those days. So it came down more to managers, that I do like, because Terry Francona was an easy pleasure to deal with. Joe Morgan was a riot for us. He was wonderful. Local guy with local references. That's always a way to charm the media, when you can speak their language. When you grew up here and went to Boston College and and played basketball and hockey and could relate to all the things that you could relate to. That's always fun in any city when the manager is actually purely completely local. So that was fun.
When you so tell me, as a sports writer, how does your relationship with the player have an effect on your writing? Like, for example, if you like a player and they have a bad game, do you find it harder to kind of criticize the bad game if you like the guy?
You have to be able to do this right, or else you don't belong in the job. Ultimately, for the way you can't control how they're going to react, you have to present yourself as being, once again, the word is fair. Fair-minded guys, you have to hope you're dealing with a reasonably fair-minded people. And sure. I've had people actually say to me, I don't mind, you're doing your job, blah, blah, blah. You don't get that too often, but I've had it. Great. It's always nice when you hear that. Yaz was one of those guys. He would say that to you, and that was good to know. Rick Burleson said that to me once. That was good to know. But you have to, and the other thing is, when you write something negative, you got to show up. That's rule. That's a cardinal rule. You got to show up, and you got to be ready to have them go after you if they want to. And it's part of the deal. You have to have that some thick skin kind of thing, and now my great fortune in covering the Celtics for 13 and a half years, 3 different times, a 7, a 4, and a 2.5, was I had one bad team.
Mm,
And,
mhm.
one bad team in my direct beat coverage. Now, as a columnist, I had several teams, but not as a beat man. And that, so generally speaking, it was a positive. It was easy. I got off easy because I was writing
Right.
positive stuff. And believe me, I never, but except that one year, which was 78, 79, the year before Bird came, the year that they had drafted him,
Mhm.
and were waiting while he was taking Indiana State to the final game. And they had a year, calendar year to sign him after they drafted him,
Mhm.
and they did
Mhm.
finally succeed in doing so. But that year was a tumultuous year for the Celtics, and there were, it wasn't a pleasant year. And
Mm.
that was the one challenging year in that regard. But lately, I got off easy because I had teams. I covered a team that won 5 championships. Teams. I covered 5 championship teams directly. I covered. Well, no, that's including the columnists. It's 4 directly and 1 as a columnist.
Mhm.
And then a team that won 68 games that got, in 60, 72, 73. You can imagine what a joyride that was. And
Mm.
I had just good. Even my first team that I covered, which was the year after Bill Russell retired, and they only won 38 games. They were. It wasn't a negative. Everybody knew it was going to be a different year, and they still were good enough to beat the championship Knicks in the season series. So it wasn't like
Yeah,
it was relentlessly awful. There was some highlights there too. So I was
sure.
very lucky, and that made life a lot easier. When you're covering good teams, it's just a lot easier.
Bringing up the trajectory of the NBA, I remember in the '90s, really the only player that kind of, quote unquote, chased championships was Charles Barkley for a while. But before that, or after that, it does seem like that kind of early 2000s, mid 2000s Celtics team was kind of the first super team. How do you feel about super teams now, and the way the players kind of move around?
It's their legal right. There's nothing we can do about it. You better adjust. You have to accommodate yourself to it. This is
Yeah.
have that act. They have a mobility that was unavailable to the older generation, and that's why if they want to sit around, if the older guys want to sit around and say, well, we never did anything like that, you couldn't do anything like that. That we know
Sure.
that. Now there were 2 guys who did force themselves out of situations. 2. And not surprisingly, they're 2 of the 3 or 4 of 10 greatest players of all time. Will Chamberlain, who twice got himself traded, and once from the Warriors back to Philadelphia to the 76ers, and secondly to the Lakers. Okay.
Mhm.
And Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who got himself traded out of Milwaukee to Los Angeles. Okay. And
Mhm.
they were the forerunners. Nobody else ever
Mhm.
could or had that kind of, if they had whatever leverage they exerted, they had it. No one else even tried to exercise it at that level at all. So they did it back in the Wilt did it in the 60s, and Kareem did it in the 70s. But until the creation of the super team that LeBron and Wade and created with Bosch and all that, they have the contractual mobility to do this. It's not going to end.
Yeah.
It's not going to
Yeah.
end. So, yeah, this is the way the game is now being orchestrated, and we have to live with it. I have, I'm accommodated to it. It's the way it is.
Yeah, I agree. And the thing that I think is interesting though now, in the mid 2000s, the argument that I was hearing, of course, I'm in Sacramento, small market, is that this is going to affect small market teams because
Mhm.
like LeBron left for Miami because he felt like he couldn't really do that in Cleveland. He couldn't get people to come to Cleveland. But now, you have Giannis in Milwaukee and he won a championship and he's getting lots of coverage. It's not like it was before. I mean, that's a small market, but he's very marketable. So, I think it's more of being able to show a culture that you can win to attract these players now more than small market, big market
Well,
kind of thing.
there's still a question. No one's positive that he's going to be a lifer in Milwaukee, by the way.
Hmm.
And
Right.
so it's up to the personality, the whim and the person. You're at the whim of these people at that level.
Yeah. Yeah.
One guy people are wondering what's going to happen now is Damian Lillard. Is he going to stick? Is he going to stick it out in
Yeah.
Portland? He's
Yeah.
the right. Bradley Beal was a name that a year and a half ago, was being tossed around in that regard.
Yeah.
Not that I think they're exactly the same player. Lillard is a better player, but
Oh
anyway,
yeah.
Lillard's name is out there. Giannis, we'll see what happens when I don't know exactly is it at the end of next year? Maybe he's possible.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it seems like ever since they lost to the Heat, they're Milwaukee is in kind of like a damage control mode. They've already fired their coach, and they're
Yeah,
doing
right,
all these things.
you're right,
But
right.
that's another thing. This year is so strange. I was just thinking, I was like, it is absolutely possible that this year we could see a 7 seed Lakers playing an 8 seed Heat in the finals. I can't remember another time that's ever happened.
Of course, you haven't, because it happened. Of course, now the Lakers are not they're an atypical 7th seed.
Yeah.
Naturally, because of the
Yeah.
circumstance, the injuries at the beginning of the year, the unavailability of the number of games that LeBron misses, the number of games that Davis misses, and then the fact that they were highly woefully incomplete, and give Rob Pelinka or surrogate general manager James, whoever, credit for what they were able to do at the trading deadline to get them the shooters that they needed, to get
Yeah.
them the offense that they needed, and also the development out of nowhere of Austin Reeves. I mean, who saw that coming?
Yeah. Wow.
But anyway,
I remember the first time I saw Austin Reeves in Sacramento, and I looked at him with the rest of the players, and that was the year that, I mean, it was just like Hall of Famer after Hall of Famer after Hall of Famer on the Kings, or I mean on the Lakers. And I'm just sitting there and I'm like, who here looks like he doesn't belong? Sure. And now he's amazing,
Yeah. And now with the Warriors, we all know that there was extenuating circumstances why they weren't, and no one to this moment. And if, let's say they do get to the final, the idea that they did go with this god awful road record this year is just, that is so atypical. And there's no what explanation there is for that. I don't know. I don't think anyone ever could come up with one. But now it's over. It's forgotten. It doesn't matter. They've won the requisite road games that they had to win already. And
yeah,
now
I was there.
Yeah, so
it was painful.
but the Lakers, once again, though, Davis, it's just uncanny. Last night he takes an elbow in the head, and now we're wondering about how serious that was. It's always something. There's always something. But we see
it's really weird, and we're sitting here. I mean, look, every player is different, and obviously an elbow to the head can affect different people different ways. But we're already hearing here. Well, Domantas Sabonis got busted right in the eye, big old butt, and he kept playing. He was playing all year with a thumb that needed surgery. Fox fractured his finger, kept playing.
Yeah.
And it seems like Davis, bumps his leg and he's out for 2-3 games. I mean, it's just a really different, everybody's different, but you sometimes, when it keeps happening, him and Zion and different people, you question their mental capacity a little bit when something like that happens.
Zion, that's a whole other interesting story. Many people, I wondered if that body could possibly hold up in the NBA, and so far the answer is no. And yet how that's affected his psyche to know how good I can be. We've seen how good he can be, but it's so infrequent, and how that wears on him personally. I don't think he's a bad person at all. I think he's probably frustrated that he can't perform. And yet what's he going to do? He is what he is. He's got that extraordinary unbasketball like body in the NBA.
Yeah. And can fly. I mean, that's the thing. Even though he's that big, I saw that with DeMarcus Cousins. The game, the way it is now, these guys who are big. That's what makes Joel Embiid so surprising. Is he's got that big traditional center body and can move that fast. DeMarcus Cousins tried, and I think that really contributed to the injuries. Was that he just, when you're running that fast with that big of a body, it's just not built to do that. And but this is a different year. I was talking about, when the Kings were the 3rd seed, I just said, are they really though? Because, the record shows that, but the West, I mean, it just seemed like all the teams, the Clippers, the Lakers, the Warriors, injuries everywhere.
I'll repeat something I said before at the onset of the playoffs. Nobody outside of Denver believes in Denver. Nobody outside of Memphis, number 2 seed, believes in Memphis. Nobody outside of Sacramento, the 3rd seed, believes in Sacramento. And it's basically, it's hyperbole, but it's basically true, more true than it's not true. People didn't respect the teams the way you think they would based on their record and all of that. And then lurking in the bottom of the draw, you got this Lakers weird situation, and you got the Warriors atypical situation. So the West was completely unfathomable to start with. Now as we sit here as we've seen it unfold a little bit, time to start taking Denver seriously, folks.
Oh yeah.
And the
Oh,
Suns
yeah.
were I forgot the best one. The Suns were the prohibitive favorite at 4
Yeah.
at the time, based on the fact that at that time they were 7-0 or so with Booker and Durant in the lineup, and they hadn't yet to lose at home, at least, And
Right.
Suns, I know I picked them, and I
Yeah.
don't think I was alone. All right, I got to pick one in the West. Oh, give me the Suns, because for the
Yeah.
reason. Well, right now Denver looks pretty good, and they're playing pretty
They
well.
look,
And
that's the thing. That's the thing that people don't remember. I mean, we've been following the West for a long time. They have been the number 1 seed all year long by a long shot. It's not, it's not even close. They were, I think they were 5 or 6 games ahead of Memphis at the end. I mean, and everyone else was 2 or 3 games. I mean, you could drop from 2 to 8 by losing 3 games in a row.
Put a handkerchief over everybody else, and
yeah.
But now they're showing, it's not over, and they could still lose to the Suns, but I doubt it. And I like the way they're playing, and like the way he's playing, and like the way Murray's playing, and so on and so forth. No way. So anyway, the West, that's that.
I wanted to shift gears also because you have a long history of covering sports, and you mentioned Barry Bonds, and you were not a fan of his. And I want to get your take as a sports writer on the steroid era and what you think about that. Do you think that is truly a black stain, or just hey, that's the way it is? And there's people who otherwise would be Hall of Famers that are not in the Hall of Fame. What is your thought on that?
It's the most disturbing. It's just so annoying that you have to deal with this, particularly when you're voting in the Hall of Fame, which I still do, still vote at the Hall of Fame. And I like it, what it should be is strictly a baseball organization, strictly evaluating people on the baseball terms. But this has clouded the issue and continues to do so, because we've still got Rodriguez on the ballot, A-Rod, and so on we go. My recommendation, which is totally sincere, I even put it in writing, and I actually got a very nice response from people in question. I think they should acknowledge that it happened, and here's the way to deal with it. Have you ever been to the hall? Have you ever?
I've never been.
Okay. Well,
No.
there's the hall. It's the hall where all the plaques are. It's a giant room, with all the plaques. Okay. And this is what the Hall of Fame. Think of Hall of Fame is. Okay. It's far more than that, of course. It's a museum with all kinds of artifacts. Okay. But it's the hall. There should be a disclaimer. Large poster written outside, saying to the effect that that there was a time in baseball history when baseball was dealt with an infestation of performance enhancing drugs. Many of the people that you will see in here performed during that era. We have instructed our voters to vote strictly on the merits of baseball. You're free to feel however you want to feel. I was a kid. You want to give a plaque a finger. That's fine.
Yeah.
But but we have instructed our voters to vote strictly on baseball merits and ignore and not to consider the PED factor. All right. I would then happily vote for all the people in question. I'd vote for Bonds. I'd vote for Clemens. I'd vote for Sosa. I'd vote for I'd vote for them. But I never voted for any of them. Okay, I was my decision, and I respect those who people, all the counter arguments I've heard from people I respect, and we're all entitled to our opinion on this, but we shouldn't have to be forced. It's the Hall of Fame. It's their Hall of Fame. They should have taken responsibility for it and not put the responsibility on us and allowed us.
Right.
They should have, and I insist that that's the best solution to this whole thing. And then
when you say that, though, when you say let's look and see, or let's put that kind of, for lack of a better term, like an asterisk there, and you're not going to take into account the PEDs, would you be voting on people who you were saying, okay, if they didn't take PEDs, they'd still be Hall of Famers? Or are you saying, well, they have Hall of Fame numbers, we're voting them even if they did use PEDs?
Well, it's the question. It's interesting. There's different categories. Obviously, we know that Bonds was on a trajectory that he would have made the MVPs. Clemens, had several sides before he left Boston, in Boston. All right, fine. However, Rafael Palmeiro, I remember one day waking up funny when many years ago, and looking at his numbers, said, "Holy shit, he's got X hits, X homers. I don't feel he's a Hall of Famer. He doesn't have he doesn't pass the smell test, and I don't think he would have done it without the PEDs. So Sosa was a one-dimensional player. I don't know. I think it's hard. It's such. It's just so annoying. It really is. That's a great question, and I don't know if I have a fully form. I think I'd have to differentiate but it's an abstract argument, because if you're going to put them in, you're going to put them in. So it is a stain. It is an annoying thing for me and for many others, and obviously for a plurality of voters, because they're off the ballot now. McGuire's off the ballot, and Bonds is off the ballot, and Rogers off the ballot. But A-Rod, who at his best was the greatest shortstop of all time. I'll make that argument easy. His numbers, his accomplishments. He's number one, and he's not even close. Now there's a very interesting topic as Poppy, and people. He was basically given an absolution by Rob Manfred personally, which is amusing. And he sailed in, did he? There's no paper trail. There's no evidence, just suppositions about how a guy could be that good at age 40, kind of thing.
Yeah. Right.
People,
right.
But I voted for guys that were suspected, because I didn't have, for example, and one of them, Craig Biggio, not Craig, excuse me, Mike Piazza. Now, supposedly Mike Piazza had the telltale acne on the back thing, which tells you supposedly was a telltale sign of, but I did vote for him. I did vote for Jeff Bigelow, because there was nothing on him other than the eye test. There's nothing. There's no remote connection. Other than the fact that but I can, and this shows how arbitrary it is. It's it's and how I always make the example, the perfect example of a perfect baseball argument, and it was resolved in the 15th final year, as I recall. Jack Morris. Now that was all about one thing. Did you respect? He was the winningest pitcher of the 80s, quote unquote. Okay, he won 254 games. He had the famous 10-inning great game in 1991, 91. But he has the highest ERA of any starter that ever has been in the Hall of Fame. So but it was a baseball. So but it was strictly about baseball. It was just a baseball argument. Didn't have to factor in. That to me was the perfect example of what it should be, strictly a baseball argument. Now the other thing, the other code, and I got trapped in this one, is personal behavior thing, as opposed to PED thing. And I'll give you an example. I was a big proponent and staunch supporter of Omar Vizquel, and who was as great a defensive shortstop as there was in his time. Was part of the greatest double play combo ever, he and Alomar. And also, when you weren't looking, sneaked in 2,700 hits, and he got involved. He was tainted with a domestic disturbance, to be polite, accusation. I don't know if it's true or not true, but the fact is that it made me uncomfortable having voted for him. You know what I'm saying? And you have some of those circumstances out there. You could always have more of those circumstances. That's a different matter. Yeah, that's not the PED matter. So it gets complicated. I'm proud to be a voter. I come from the era when to be a baseball writer, Hall of Fame voter is a tremendous honor, tremendous privilege, and I do consider that. And I think I've been training for it my whole life, quite frankly. Baseball the way I have, and being something of a amateur historian, and all that. I think I'm qualified to vote, on this matter, and then I still pass muster. So we'll see how long it goes.
So as a Giants fan, I got to ask you, what do you think about Tim Lincecum?
That's a classic borderline. He's in a category of guys that in that 200 win area, size. I could marshal an easy devil's advocate argument, for him. Absolutely. You don't get, there's no buzz about him though. There's no buzz. Never really, outside of San Francisco, there really hasn't been a buzz about. He's kind of forgotten. It's going to be interesting. Yeah. He's kind of forgotten. I just remember, all that we all wondered the same thing when he came up. How can that little guy survive throwing that violently, with that motion? And he did,
Right.
he did it, but it didn't survive as long as others, however, but he did. He's not kept. There's guys, a lot of guys in that like the low 200 win cap. Is that what he has? I'm saying this.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think so.
Louis Tiant, who I'm a big advocate of, is in that category. There's a lot of, if he's in, of course, this is the, if he's in, why isn't he in, kind of thing, and
Yeah,
in that
sure.
category, a lot of those guys. It'll be interesting. My prediction is it'll be a long, hard struggle for him.
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? I think it's, you can't deny his role in some of those Giants
Right.
World
And
Series wins.
that's gonna be a big selling point. No
Right.
question.
But his career, I mean, as far as the best years of his career were so short comparatively.
Yeah.
Because like you said, he threw so violently, he just threw his arm out. I mean, it became very clear when he could no longer do it.
And it was predicted, and it's exactly what happened.
Yeah. But at the same time, I can't think there are very few pitchers and Giants that I can remember that are as well loved as Tim Lincecum was, or like Matt Cain was too. He was pretty well loved. But Tim Lincecum was just kind of special because he just was always a Giant, came up through the farm system, and was so young and so small, and just everybody took to him. Him and Posey together.
Yeah.
That was just a cool thing,
Oh no, he was a phenomenon, and it was I should say beloved and fun to have around in the game, and it's just things like that maybe ought to matter, to a degree for voters. So it'd be interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. So, there's a couple of questions I ask everybody, and I want to ask you. You've had a long and awesome career, and what would you say is your greatest success in life?
Well, and professionally, it's funny. Tom Boswell told me something a long time ago, to the great Tom Boswell, and with regard to, we both were columnists. We both were beat guys at different times, and we're columnists and feature writers. I've done the whole gamut. I have been at the time a full-time feature writer, a full-time columnist that ended from 1989 until I retired in 2012. A beat man. I covered 11 Olympics, and so forth. And I'm proud of, my column writing. I'm proud of this. But quite frankly, he said, don't be ashamed when people praise you for your basketball. Okay. As immodest as it's going to sound, I'm sorry, I would put up my basketball game story writing on deadline with anybody that ever wrote the game of basketball. I will stack up. I'm proudest of what I was able to do with that game, and my mental prime. I'll put it up with anybody. I think so. I have to say, if I did something that I would say maybe I could do it as well or better than anybody. There are other great columnists. I would not flatter myself. I think I'm pretty good. I would not flatter myself to say that I'm better than certain people. But frankly, I don't know if there was a better basketball writer than I was. Frankly, to tell you the truth about it, analyzing and having and putting the game in perspective, and being literate and being funny and being and making it readable and fun for someone to either relive the game or B, to see what they missed when they didn't write it. I used to say I approach the game like a critic, that I will tell you what you missed if you weren't there, and I will enhance the experience for you if you were there. I think I did that as well as anybody I've ever read, and I don't care how immodest that sounds.
No, and if you're good at something, you should know it. And so I appreciate the confidence. What do you think is your biggest failure in life, and what did you learn from it?
Oh wow, that's tough. In life, oh my God, we all,
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I happily married for 54 years. I can tell you, great sorrow was I had a son died at age 38,
Oh wow.
and
He was 38 or you were 38?
He was 38, and
Oh, I see.
in unusual, debatable circumstances. Some people know that story. We can't get into it here.
Sure.
But it's I'm put this way, I'm Googleable. You can read about it. It's out there, and obviously that's the greatest sorrow for my wife and myself, and our daughter, his sister. So but I'm proud of and I have 3 wonderful grandchildren who are 23 years old, triplets, his sons, his children. but I don't know. I mean, if I were, if I had one regret in life, I wish I were better with money. I wish I were better with money, but but in things that really matter, friendships, relationships, and all that, I have no complaints, and I'm totally grateful that I lucked into uh, a professional working circumstance. I hit the Boston Globe in 1969 when the Boston Globe in '68 as a summer intern was in its ascendancy as one of the
Mhm,
great newspapers in America at a time when newspapers were the currency, when they mattered, when they
mhm,
dominated the journalistic world and the educational world. And the Globe Sport wanted to have a great sports section under an editor named Tom Winship, who wasn't a great sports fan, but recognized that it mattered in the city of Boston and in New England, and wanted to have a great one. And he and gave it okay to go do whatever they had to do. I mean, there was a period of time when I would go to them and say, I got to go do a story on this or that. And although it wasn't ridiculous, I want to go to Mars or something.
mhm,
Off you went. You just did it.
mhm.
It was a place I told you they didn't mess with my copy. They treated me great. Could not imagine a better working circumstance than I was lucked into.
Mhm.
Working for the Boston Globe and everything it did for me. So I'm very grateful for that.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's the reason I always ask people about the failures because I have noticed in my life that the things that are quote unquote failures actually I learn the most from, and I come out a stronger, better person as a result. I couldn't imagine losing a son that young. My kids are young. I've got four myself, and they're wonderful. They're all wonderful, but they're younger, and they're the light of my life. And so I can't imagine the sorrow that you guys felt. Uh, the last question I ask everybody on these is, at some point down the road, we hope a long time from now, you're going to pass away. There'll be a funeral. Someone will give you a eulogy. What do you think the one thing is that you hope someone would say in your eulogy?
That he never got old and jaded and never lost his enthusiasm for the thing that directed his life, and that's this love of sports. That he was always open to new suggestions. He was always open to welcoming new stars and into the discussion. That he never I saw growing up so many guys that even by the time they hit 50 were bored and jaded and mailing it in and tired of it. I'm for some. I still love the competition. I still love games. I still love who won. I think my last words are going to be who won, and
Yeah.
that's not, and that was the key to me, the driving force. We mentioned that earlier about writing about people as opposed to writing about games. And for some reason, I am programmed to appreciate this aspect of life that we call sport, and this competition among people, it's fun for me to observe. So I hope people will cite, and I do think it's my calling card in the business that people associate me with enthusiasm, and
Yeah.
from what I've gathered, and I hope that's what's remembered.
I always love, the thing that's cool about having a podcast and one that is so eclectic. I mean, where I get to talk to so many people is that I get to talk to people about their passions. And I remember someone telling me I'm a big pro wrestling fan, which isn't technically a sport, it's an entertainment. But I talked to them about that, and they asked me, I remember they asking me something when I was younger about wrestling, and I just gave this long, exciting response. And I said, "Do you like wrestling?" And he goes, "No, but I like hearing you talk about wrestling." Right. And it's like, and that's what I get from you is that, you know, uh, I bet even if somebody doesn't like sports, the enthusiasm and the passion that you exude, even as we're talking for the sports that you love, it just exudes and it makes it fun.
And the thing that we didn't get it, we centered on the conventional bread and butter American sports, baseball, basketball, football, etc. But I love I love the Olympics. I mentioned Olympics. I did 11 Olympics. I
Yeah.
walked in cold, not knowing much, particularly in the Winter Olympics. And the only sport I knew had any interest in personally and at all was hockey.
Mm.
But you have to immerse yourself in this newer world, and I love that world. But I mean, I personally follow the Premiership. I know what's going on over there, and
Mm.
the Premiership in England. I'm following closely the relegation thing in the end, and how Leicester, who won the championship like 6 years ago, is in danger of being relegated now. It's a circumstance we don't have in America. I just note that the Italian Open has started. I know, and of course with the PGA is on our doorstep next week. I care about all that stuff. Not to the degree, nor am I as knowledgeable as him about baseball and basketball. But I mean, this is what I'm trying to portray. For some reason, this is the way I was, wired. I can't. That's it.
Yeah. Well, what's so cool about sports, like in general, including the Olympics? I mean, there's always such a political component to the Olympics that can make or break a lot of world events. But I think what's cool about sports, I thought the same thing about pro wrestling, really, is that like you can have two people who would never have anything to talk about that can connect because they love basketball, baseball, football, the Olympics. They can talk, and they can bond over a mutual love of something like that. And that's what I mean. Like the greatest thing that's happened this year for me, quite frankly, is watching. I have two sons. One is 16 and one is 10. Well, he's almost 10. He's 9. And they are so impassioned with basketball this year because they have a team that's good, that they love, that they and watching them, I remember my dad taking me to games and me taking them to games and seeing them get lost in the spectacle and the excitement. That's just special, and it creates a bond that they're going to remember forever.
Sure.
And so
I'll leave you this one because it kind of harkens back to how we got started. But I always like to have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and
sure.
Kind of who I am and how I got to there. When my father would take me to a local high school basketball game, which he did often, and Trenton Catholic was a big deal in Trenton, and they were a state power in those days, and it was a packed gymnasium on a Friday night, and I would love the game, but I couldn't wait till Saturday morning. That was a Friday night. On Saturday morning to pick up the paper and read about the game, because it wasn't validated in my mind until I had actually read about it. And not many 7, 8, 9-year-olds are like that. And that explains how I got on the path to where we're sitting here today talking about what we've been talking about.
Yeah. Well, I'm grateful you were on that path, and I'm grateful that you were willing to give me the time to talk. This is, like I said, this is what's cool about this podcast is, you don't know my lineup that I just had, but I went from having a Mormon scholar to a drag queen to a WWE Hall of Famer to before you, I'm going to drop an actor who played in the Mighty Ducks movie. He was a child actor, played the goalie in the Mighty Ducks movie, Sean Wythe, to a sports writer. And I just think it's so cool because I never would have met any of these people if it wasn't for the fact that I had this podcast.
No, it's been fun. I've really enjoyed the conversation. It's been great.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I'll tell you what, we got your information. Let's have you back. Maybe during, if the playoffs come on, we'll see if you can come back and we could talk again.
Okay. And email me, shoot me a mailing address. I want to send, I'll have your, I'll send you the column I wrote on I don't have to do that. I'll email you column I wrote on the history of the tortured franchise of the Rochester, Cincinnati, Kansas City, Omaha, Sacramento Kings.
I would love that. I appreciate it. So, okay. Well, thanks everyone for listening. Subscribe. I'm grateful to have this podcast, grateful to everyone who's listened. And thank you, Bob Bryant. You've been fantastic.
So long, Josh.